guys, it's Casey, and today we're going to talk about reading slumps. So today is going to be a super chill, chatty video where I'm just sitting on the floor, and we're going to talk about reading slumps because I am currently in one. So a reading slump being a period of time where you're not feeling like picking up any books, you're not wanting to read, or you're not getting as much reading done as you normally would or you would want to be doing. So I don't know about you guys, but I tend to get in a reading slump when I get really stressed out and overwhelmed with other things. Even though reading is one of my favorite ways to relax and one of my favorite hobbies, sometimes when things ramp up in other areas of my life, I struggle to be able to focus when I'm reading. So I know lately I've had an absolute crap ton of schoolwork to do. April's a really rough month, so I don't have much free time. And when I do have free time, I usually feel too mentally exhausted to actually read. So I found myself in a bit of a slump. But I do know that reading is a great way for me to relieve stress, so I want to try to break that slump. So I wanted to talk to you guys today about some tips and some things that I know help me get out of a reading slump. Partially to kind of give you guys that information and partially to give myself the kick that I need to try to pull myself out of this. So the very first thing that helps me get out of reading slumps is audiobooks. So I listen to audiobooks usually as like one or two of the books that I read every month. I don't primarily use them when I read, but I do enjoy them. And I find that they're very helpful for getting out of reading slumps because usually when I'm having trouble sitting down and reading a book, it's because I feel like I don't have the mental energy to sit down and literally read words on a page. And an audiobook allows me to kind of take in that story without having to sit and physically read the words on a page. It also allows me to read in a lot of different times and a lot of different settings. So if the problem is that I'm running around too much or I'm on campus all day or I don't have time to sit down with a book and read in my chair like I like to do, an audiobook can be really helpful because I can get a little bit of reading done in a lot of different places. So I can listen to it in the car on the way, or I can listen to it while I'm on a walk or things like that, or other things that I would normally be doing. I can then integrate reading into part of that. And that can kind of keep me on pace with some of my reading goals and some of the things that I want to get done for the month. So I do find audiobooks to be an extremely helpful way to go about doing that. I got tea now. So one of the other things that I like to do is listen to an audiobook while I'm reading the physical book itself. So either using a physical book that I own and getting an audiobook from the library or however you want to get them. I feel like it's very helpful to have the option to listen to it and to physically read it at the same time. I do this a lot with bigger books, especially when I'm feeling kind of slumpy, because it's helpful when I'm having trouble getting into it, especially like complicated fantasy world type things. Sometimes just listening to it, I get a little bit lost, especially when they're throwing a ton of new information at me. And if I'm struggling to sit down and physically read, that usually also doesn't help. So sometimes just listening to the audiobook on a faster speed than I would usually actually listen to it while sitting down and looking at the physical text can be really helpful in getting me immersed back into it and used to kind of reading the words on the page again. I also usually know it's worked when I start reading ahead of the audiobook, and this might depend on your reading speed, but I know I read a little bit faster than I can listen to audiobooks. So when I start ignoring the audiobook that I'm listening to and reading ahead pretty consistently, then I can usually turn off the audiobook and switch over to the physical book. And that can usually pull me right out of a slump, even if it's just like not feeling it for a day. That can help really pull me out of one. One of the other things about having the audiobook and the physical book is it allows you to read in multiple different settings. So it has all of the benefits of the audiobooks that I was just talking about, but also I can sit down with a cup of tea and read in my comfy chair at the end of the night, and I still get that kind of feeling that I get when I read a physical book. It's also helpful because sometimes when I get into a slump, it's because I've been too busy and had to put a book down for a while, and it's hard for me to get back into it. So having both options available to you means I'm less likely to put it down. So if I know that I can just listen to a couple of chapters between classes or something like that, I'm more likely to keep picking that book up, even if I'm not getting as far as I would if I just had like a lot of time to dedicate to physically reading it. And I think that's the problem I have with slumps a lot of the times, is if I stop picking a book up or stop picking up books in general, it's really hard for me to kind of get back into it. So outside of audiobooks, physical books, and all that, one of my other tips that I like to do is I like to reread books. So sometimes if I get really slumpy and nothing is sounding good and I'm not feeling any of the books that I would normally want to read, sometimes I pick up an old favorite. So I have like a little favorites of all time shelf on Goodreads that I have, and sometimes I'll just go back to that shelf and decide to pick up a book from there that I know I like. And I do this for a couple of reasons. One, because I enjoy the books and I know that I like them. But that allows me to read a book that I know I'm going to enjoy, especially if I've been hitting a string of books that are just kind of meh, because that can also make me feel pretty slumpy. So reading one that I know is going to work out can be really helpful for that. Two, I don't have to put quite as much mental effort into it when I read it. So since I already know the plot, I already know the characters, I already know everything that's going to happen, I don't have to read it as closely as I would another book, but I still get back into the habit of reading. And like I was saying earlier, a lot of the times for me, it's just falling out of that habit that causes this slump. So even if it's something I've already read before and something that I'm not really paying that much attention to, that can be really helpful for me. Another thing is when I pick up a book that is one of my favorites and I know I'm really going to enjoy it, that can kind of remind me what I really liked about that book. Plus you pick up new things every time you read the book, so I usually get a new appreciation for some of those old favorites, which in and of itself is like a really interesting experience. So it never feels like a waste of time or I'm just doing it to get out of a slump. There's always like that extra layer of benefit to it. Plus, it's just a lot of fun. They're your favorites for a reason. The next thing I do to get out of a reading slump is I read short books, especially like graphic novels and manga and things like that. This can really be helpful when sometimes the quantity that you're reading is what's getting you down. So this month I have not read that many books, even though I've still read a fair amount of pages, but for some reason thinking, oh, I've only read X number of books this month, makes me feel less motivated to read. So reading short books like graphic novels or novellas or manga or things like that can allow you to check off a book on your list and say that you've read a book for this month and check that off. And that can sometimes give you the push that you need to continue on with reading. Sometimes because I read a lot of big books, sometimes I feel like I haven't finished a book in so long, even if I've been reading a lot of pages. So intermixing like short books in the middle can kind of prevent me from getting into a reading slump. If I read a lot of big books in a row, I can start to feel pretty slumpy because I feel like I haven't finished anything. So I would recommend mixing shorter books in just generally if you want to keep up your pace, but they're also very good for kind of pulling you out. Because once you finish one, for me at least, it's easier to go on to the next one. I usually get stuck kind of in the middle of a book. So it's a lot easier when you can sit down and read the book in one sitting. So those are most of my main tips, and I do think that like combinations of those can work. Like for example, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is one of my favorite books of all time, and it's also very short. So sometimes I'll pull that out and I'll read all of it or just pieces of it when I'm feeling really slumpy. So just going back and even reading certain passages of some of my favorite books or some shorter books or just reading little snippets of things can be really helpful to kind of pull me back out. And my last tip is not really a tip to get out of a slump necessarily, but it's kind of just talking about that frame of mind. Sometimes the best way to get out of a slump is to recognize that you're in a slump and that is completely fine. I feel like sometimes we put this weird pressure on us that we need to be reading a certain amount or we need to be reading all the time, when I love reading as much as the next person, but ultimately, it really doesn't matter how much you are reading. We're all just doing this because it's something that we enjoy. Like you probably wouldn't hear someone saying they're in a TV slump because they haven't watched a new show in a while. Like that probably isn't the same thing, but in reality, it's kind of the same situation. So just allowing yourself to be kind of slumpy and maybe moving on and picking up a different hobby for a while can be completely fine. And it might allow you to take the break that you need from reading to come back into it with kind of renewed energy. Because pushing yourself through something that you don't want to be doing, you're probably not going to like the book as much as you would have if you had waited till a time where you actually wanted to pick it up. And if you're like me and most of your reading slumps come because external stressors have really ramped up, then it's absolutely 100% definitely okay for you to just take a break and chill, to just relax and decompress so that you can get back to reading and hobbies that you really enjoy when you're in a better frame of mind to do it. But those are all of my tips for getting out of a reading slump. If you have your own, please tell me because I am struggling. I don't know if you've seen my April TBR, but it is too big for me to be struggling as hard as I am this month. But I think that's all I've got for you guys today. If you'd like to keep up with what I'm reading, I have a link to my Goodreads down in the description below. But other than that, I'll see you guys next time.